to the Pro Bono Happy Hour. I'm Rena Glazer. Welcome back. Do you like listening to our show? We aim to inspire, teach, and sometimes entertain. If you're listening on iTunes, or what's now known as Apple Podcasts, could you please take a moment to subscribe and leave a review? It's quick and easy to do. You could just leave a rating or add some comments, whatever you'd like. We'd appreciate the feedback, and it would make it easier for other listeners to find the show, spreading the word about pro bono and access to justice. Thanks so much for your help. Today we're talking to Andrew LeGrand from Gibson Dunn. Andrew's based in Dallas and is a member of the firm's litigation department. He also maintains an active pro bono practice, and we discussed how he combines the two. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Andrew, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's jump right in. To get started, could you tell us about you, share a little about yourself and your background?
Sure. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, but raised in Arlington, Texas. I followed my oldest sister to the University of Oklahoma, where I got my bachelor's degree in English and African American Studies. I taught for about a year. I taught English in alternative school, and then I pursued my master's in education from Columbia University, Teachers College. From there, I decided to go to law school. I studied law at Columbia Law School, and frankly, I couldn't escape the law. While I was a kid, I had the seed of the law sort of planted in my mind from watching Perry Mason. Kind of dates myself there a little bit, but at Teachers College, I had a focus in higher education policy, and issues like access and equity and affirmative action and the Civil Rights Act were pretty prevalent in my studies. So I decided to go to law school to pursue this passion that I had for a long time.
So let's come back to Perry Mason and the law in a moment, but I want to talk about making the transition from the University of Oklahoma to Columbia in New York City. And I, as someone who went to school up there and lived a block away from Teachers College and did that path myself, although 116th and Broadway in that area is a lot different when you were there than when I was there. How was that transition from Oklahoma to Manhattan?
So the transition was fairly easy for me because I was born in New York and lived there for a little while and still had some family out there. So I kind of knew what I was getting myself into in terms of the hustle and bustle of the big city. And Oklahoma was a great place to go to college because back then it was a college town. It's grown significantly since I was there. But the transition was fairly straightforward for me. I was married at the time, so my wife came up with me, and things worked out really well.
That's wonderful. So let's go back to sort of Perry Mason and your cultural and other influences. Tell me more about developing a passion for the law and thinking that would be a track for you.
So, as I mentioned, when I was a child, I just remember watching Perry Mason and, In the Heat of the Night, all these shows that my mom used to keep on late at night when I was supposed to be in bed. I would turn them on and watch them eagerly to figure out what was going to happen next. I didn't really think I would pursue law as a kid. It was just one of those things where I had some interest, and I was fascinated by Perry Mason. My real passion was in education, and so, I pursued that initially. At the time, though, when I was pursuing my master's in education from Columbia, I had, like I said, a lot of exposure to the way that the law impacts every part of our society. And I began to view the law as sort of the most potent mechanism to affect social change. And so that is what prompted me, and at the nudging of my advisor as well, but that is what prompted me to go ahead and go to law school.
And how did you decide, sort of what to pursue then post-school, right? Sort of career in education, career in law. How did that go beyond school to professional life?
Initially, there wasn't much thought given to it. I had known for a very long time that I wanted to be an educator, and so I went to the University of Oklahoma with becoming a teacher on my mind. I mean, like every college student, I think I changed my major maybe 5 or 6 times. So initially, there wasn't very much thought given into sort of what my professional career would look like. But as I began to dig into education policy, I realized that the law was sort of my calling, if you will. And I didn't know sort of what I would do. I didn't know if I would, pursue public interest law or be at a big firm where I am now. But I was very attracted to the idea of using the law as a way to really make an impact on people's lives. And so that's what sort of made me make the jump from education to law.
So since you mentioned that you are at a big law firm, Gibson Dunn, tell us how you got there. Walk us through a little bit your career history and why you joined the firm.
When I was in law school, I guess before I started law school, I was a member of the Sponsors for Educational Opportunity program, which is a fantastic program that places pre-law school students into big law firms for a summer and then does some educational enrichment stuff and training programs. So my first summer I spent time at LaBeouf, Lamb, Green, McRae, which ultimately became Dewey LaBeouf and ultimately became defunct. But I spent my first summer before law school there and got some exposure to big law, if you will. I spent some time doing some transactional work, spent some time doing some litigation. My summer as a 1L, I spent time at LaBeouf, Lamb, McRae, and Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, where I worked for the general counsel, Leslie Rosenthal, who was a phenomenal boss, and she taught me a lot that ultimately I came back to, and we'll talk about in terms of the pro bono stuff that I do now. But after my 1L summer, I split my time as a 2L between Sherman and Sterling and Dewey and LaBeouf. It had actually become Dewey and LaBeouf by then. And I also spent some time at the Legal Defense and Education Fund in New York. So I did not summer at Gibson Dunn. That was a long way for me to say that. I did not summer at Gibson Dunn. In the middle of the recession, my wife wanted to return to the Dallas area, and so I decided to apply to a few places out here in Dallas, and I was fortunate enough to receive an offer to join Gibson Dunn. When I interviewed here, I fell in love with some of the folks here, some of the folks that I met. The culture seemed very conducive to success. And frankly, the free market system I thought was unique and would allow me to sort of chart my own course and find my own passions and succeed on my own terms. And the free market system, that is, a system by which people here, associates here, aren't assigned work. You aren't assigned to a practice group. You get to decide what you want to do and seek out your own work. Build relationships with mentors organically. The combination of the free market system and the people here and the culture generally was really attractive, and that's why I joined Gibson Dunn.
That's great. That helps us explain not only why you joined the firm, but how you ended up in Dallas. So perfect. So before we move on, I want to follow up with something that you mentioned, because the general counsel at Lincoln Center is very well known. She's very prominent. And you mentioned that she was a phenomenal boss. So before we leave this, what makes for a phenomenal boss? What aspects of that experience so resonate now that you would call her a phenomenal boss?
Yeah, so she really did just have a genuine interest in my professional development, but also a passion for doing what's right and ensuring the vitality of the organization. I distinctly remember she introduced me into this program that she developed, which she called Counsel's Counsel program, and through that effort, she would get associates and even partners at various law firms in New York City to contribute a few hours pro bono to helping Lincoln Center deal with the legal issues that the organization was confronted with. And I was very struck by not only her guidance and her passion, but also the network that she built and the impact that she had, in my opinion, throughout the city, such that you mentioned she's well-known, very prominent lawyer, but people genuinely seem to like her and want to work for her. And she gave them opportunities, particularly associates, gave opportunities that they otherwise would not have received. So I just found that whole experience fascinating, and I really did appreciate, and I still do appreciate everything that she's done for Lincoln Center and for me personally.
Those are great qualities for anyone who works in a managerial, capacity to keep in mind. So I think those are great lessons. So before we circle back to Pro Bono, tell us a little bit about your practice, what areas you focus on, and your areas of expertise.
So I'm a general commercial litigator. I think about 75 to 80% of my work is class action work. So I've been doing class action defense work since I rejoined the firm after my clerkship. I clerked in the Northern District of Texas for Judge Fish, A.J. Fish, and then the Seventh Circuit for Judge Ann Claire Williams, who just recently retired. But I'm a general commercial litigator with a primary focus on class actions. As I mentioned, about 75 to 80% of my practice relates to class actions. I do some appellate work. It's a very small portion of my practice. When I first rejoined the firm after my appellate clerkship, the proportion was probably flipped. I think I did maybe 75 to 80% appellate work. But I like the interactive nature of trial level work. I like being around colleagues rather than being in a room in front of Westlaw. So I've found my calling in class action defense and trial level litigation work.
Now, you also maintain an active and, I'll say, award-winning pro bono caseload. Why? What sparked your passion and interest in pro bono and access to justice?
A couple of things. I mean, first, I grew up with almost nothing. I saw firsthand the value and the impact of service to the community, particularly by those professionals who have some specialized skills or training and can do something for folks that they might not otherwise be able to do for themselves. I also just generally believe that as a lawyer, all lawyers, we've been given an extraordinary gift, and we have an obligation to use that gift to the betterment of society, however you define it, right? Whether it's criminal justice reform, religious freedom, whatever the issue it is that sparks you or that you are passionate about, I do believe as lawyers we have an obligation to use our skills to further those causes. And then finally, I think my time as a law clerk, both in the Northern District of Texas and in the Seventh Circuit, I witnessed again firsthand sort of the difference that quality advocacy can make on the outcomes of cases. And, Judge Posner, who just recently retired, has been talking a lot about how pro ses are treated in our judicial system. And I think he's 100% right. There are a lot of meritless cases that are brought by pro se litigants or indigent litigants, but there are some that actually do have some merit, and they just need the guidance and advocacy of a skilled attorney. And it's unfortunate that our judicial system really isn't designed to be navigated by non-lawyers. So everyday folks who need their disputes resolved are often tripped up by procedure or the technicalities of form of a brief, or motions or deadlines, things that litigators take for granted because we understand it as sort of second nature. You pull up the rules of civil procedure and you follow the rules. It's easy, right? But to non-lawyers, it's archaic and arcane. It doesn't really make much sense. People don't really understand why procedure should frustrate their efforts to get a ruling on the merits. And so just that experience as a law clerk, I think, really opened my eyes to the value that we can contribute to individual litigants, but also to the courts by volunteering some of our time to help folks who would otherwise be left on their own to navigate this very complex legal system.
Great perspectives. And I'm so glad that you brought up the breaking news about Judge Posner, because I think it'll be fascinating to see what he writes, what he does. And since he's focused on this as his, sort of seminal issue, it's going to be really interesting.
That's right. And I will say, the one thing about the Seventh Circuit that really surprised me was this their effort, the concerted effort by the court to screen some, pro se appeals or even other appeals that aren't pro se, where a lawyer withdraws, to see if there's some merit to these cases and appoint lawyers to take them on. I wish that every court of appeals adopted a similar program, because it really has made a tremendous difference, I think, in people's lives, because there are cases that would have not been either heard on the merits, or, as Judge Posner mentioned, sort of been rubber stamped because a staff attorney didn't think, based on the pro se filings, that there was any merit there. But when it's assigned to a skilled attorney, usually an attorney at a big law firm, the full weight of the firm digs into the record, tries to find whatever appealable issues there are, and presents those in a clear and understandable way, and ultimately it will secure a ruling on the merits of the issues in the appeal. So I think the program that the Seventh Circuit internally has is phenomenal, and I really do wish that other courts of appeals take the same approach.
So let's talk a little bit more about this. You were very instrumental in developing an informal pro bono appellate program at the firm with the Seventh Circuit. So tell us about your role and what that's meant for the pro bono at the firm.
Right. So part of this is just borrowing from what the Seventh Circuit does internally. So like I mentioned, the Seventh Circuit has a volunteer attorney panel or program, which basically you can submit your name and be on a list to take on appeals pro bono as appointments are needed. When I got to Gibson Dunn, again going back to the free market system, I was thinking about how can I chart my own path to do some pro bono work. And we talked about Leslie Rosenthal at Lincoln Center earlier, and the Counsel's Counsel program, but that really is sort of what I borrowed from, right? The idea that we could provide an extraordinary service to individual litigants in the court by us lawyers at Gibson Dunn, particularly associates here, donating some of our time, taking on some of these cases, briefing them and arguing them to the extent that there's oral argument, and also give our associates an opportunity to develop, because so many young lawyers at Gibson Dunn, and I think at big law firms everywhere, are clamoring for opportunities to stand up in court to litigate cases either in trial or on appeal, and really take ownership of them. And so there's a perfect intersection of interest, right, where the individual litigants and the court need assistance. They need someone to help shepherd these appeals through this complex appellate process and identify the relevant issues and advocate on behalf of those issues as zealously as possible. And associates at law firms and associates here at Gibson Dunn have an interest in taking on these cases. And so what I tried to do when I got back to Gibson Dunn was offer associates the opportunity to take on these cases by tapping into the network that I built while I was at the Seventh Circuit, and building on relationships that I'd made when I was a clerk, was able to build a sort of pipeline, if you will, where we get a fairly steady stream of cases to potentially take on. And I think we have a a nice list or a fulsome list of attorneys here at Gibson Dunn who are willing to take these cases on. So my role really is just matching them up. I mean, I don't think there's anything particularly special about that, but it has been useful to help associates here get those opportunities.
Yeah, I think the intersection of pro bono and professional development is quite important, and I think you explained why very eloquently. Tell us a little bit about Rashad Imani.
Right. Mr. Imani is a Wisconsin state prisoner who was convicted for armed robbery and a few other things, but he was convicted after a trial in which he had asked to represent himself, but was denied that opportunity because the Wisconsin State Trial Court didn't think, essentially, that he would do a good job because he's not a lawyer. Unfortunately for the Wisconsin Trial Court and the appellate courts as well, the Supreme Court has basically said that you can't think about whether the individual litigant who seeks to represent him or herself will be a skilled advocate. If they are competent, they should be allowed to represent themselves. Now, obviously, there are some restrictions. You have to still abide by the rules and things like that. But so Mr. Imani was convicted of armed robbery in a trial in which he wasn't allowed to represent himself. He filed a habeas petition after exhausting his state court appeals. The habeas petition was denied in the district court. And once it got to the Seventh Circuit, I was contacted about potentially taking on the appeal. I actually have some interest in criminal justice reform, and I've done a few habeas appeals and direct criminal appeals. So it was a perfect match for me. And Mr. Imani was extremely great client. I mean, he had a lot of thoughts and was very well read in the law. Frankly, I don't know how the trial court thought he wouldn't do a good job because he knew a lot about law. He knew more about law than some lawyers. So we got the case when it was in the Seventh Circuit, and obviously I had a few other colleagues here at the firm who helped out with that case. And we were able to reverse the district court's denial of Mr. Imani's habeas petition and get Mr. Imani a new trial.
Do you have any takeaways or reflections from your experience representing Mr. Imani and working on his case?
I do. I mentioned in jest that I didn't know why the trial court thought he couldn't represent himself because he seemed to me to know a lot more about the law than some lawyers. And I think that's a pretty good takeaway. That is, pro se litigants, individual litigants who cannot afford an attorney, they're not all, incompetent. I mean, there are a lot of folks out there who are, intelligent. They just don't know the procedure or they can't navigate the rules of civil procedure or criminal procedure because they haven't had that exposure to them. And so one takeaway for me was, just because someone is a indigent litigant or a pro se, it doesn't mean that they can't advocate on their own behalf. And I do think there's a role to play for people who, have a background in law, who have gone to law school and are practicing lawyers, where there are particularly complex issues to navigate that, our training or our skills, best prepares us to resolve. But the takeaway for me was don't judge a book by its cover. You shouldn't presume that pro se or individual indigent litigants representing themselves, that their cases have no merit, because that just simply isn't the case.
That's a great lesson and a great reminder. What do you say to busy law firm lawyers who don't think they have the time to get involved with pro bono?
I would say they're wrong. I think time, we're all restricted by time. But if you're passionate about something and you find something that a cause that you really want to advocate on behalf, you'll make time. And so for me, as an associate at Gibson Dunn, I spent a lot of time on the weekends, for example, doing pro bono work. I would usually reserve some time on the weekends or late at night where I would, dedicate an hour here or 2 hours there to working on a brief or doing research related to a pro bono case. So if you find a cause that you're passionate about, if you find something that really interests you and you really do want to give back, you will make time. It can be an hour a day. It could be a weekend, a month. Depending on the type of pro bono work that you're doing, pro bono doesn't require all of your time. It only requires, a little bit of it, and surely you can make time to give back to folks who need it.
What motivates and inspires you?
There are a few things that motivates and inspires me. First and foremost, it's the sort of desire to be just a good person, right? I mean, we all have our faults, and I am not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I do try to be a good person, and I do try to help folks who need it. I think part of that is rooted in my background and receiving the assistance of people who could afford to provide that assistance when I was younger, left a imprint on me. But I also think there's something about legacy that motivates and inspires me, and that is, even if no one else knows about what my legacy will ultimately be, I do want people to remember me as someone who tried to help out. And so, I want my children to be proud of me. I want my wife to be proud of me, my family to be proud of me, my colleagues, and not proud because of my own personal achievements, but proud because I didn't waste my time thinking only about myself, but instead tried to do something to help others.
I hear our better angels calling, and I'm going to remember that message that you just gave us for the rest of the day, the week, and beyond. That's that's good stuff. I'm fired up. Could you share some additional stories about pro bono matters that you've been involved in or witnessed that have been particularly meaningful to you for whatever reason over the course of your career? Tell us a few stories.
Absolutely. I should say that, Gibson Dunn as a firm more generally has been at the forefront of some of the most important legal issues in the public interest pro bono space. And it is one of the reasons why I really do appreciate the opportunity to be a lawyer at this firm. So, everything from marriage equality to the immigration issues that are going on right now, this firm does not shy away from stepping up to do what's right. And in my own personal capacity, there are a couple of cases that, I just feel very proud of because of, people at this firm and either work with me or on their own advocated for causes that are near and dear to my heart. So, I'll give you a couple examples. One example is we had this case here in Texas in our Dallas office on behalf of an organization that builds houses for low-income people in the Dallas area. And they were sued by someone who purchased the house that the organization built, because the house ended up having a few very minor issues, but the facts actually revealed that those issues were caused by a lack of maintenance. But this lawsuit really did put the organization on the brink of disaster. I mean, not only did the lawsuit seek an extraordinary amount of damages, but it also raised issues about the organization's ability to get credit because there was a pending litigation against it, and so it was a very unfortunate situation where the organization tried its best to help this homeowner, wanted to go out and do all these repairs for free, but the homeowner had felt wronged by this nonprofit organization, and essentially it felt like wanted to take it down. So we were able to help the organization out in that case, and we ultimately won summary judgment. But I think the the reason why that case sticks out to me is because even after, we prevailed on summary judgment, we were able to help that homeowner, reconcile his differences with the organization, and the organization still went out there and made some of the repairs that the homeowner had asked for. That kind of case sticks with me because it shows, like, yes, we have litigation that can oftentimes be contentious, that can be existential, right, for certain organizations, both for-profit companies and nonprofits. But at the end of the day, most people are trying to do what's right. And so even though we prevailed on summary judgment, here is this organization whose mission it is to help low-income residents in Dallas doing what's right. Even though it won on the merits in this litigation, it went out and made these repairs for this homeowner. So that was a great case. Another case that I'll just mention very briefly is the Miguel Perez appeal. It was my first appeal in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals after my clerkship. The first case that I had taken on and briefed and argued by myself. And that case involved a prisoner who had been injured during a basketball game in the prison, and his injury was basically ignored for an unusual and extraordinary amount of time. Mr. Perez, sued the prison and various prison officials under the First Amendment and Eighth Amendment for, cruel and unusual punishment and retaliation for filing various grievances. The prison and the prison healthcare officials had ignored the injury at the outset and then ignored the advice of a specialist who had requested or required surgery, or at least some kind of splint for Mr. Perez's injury he injured his hand. So, we took on that case pro bono in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. The district court had dismissed his claims under the Prison Litigation Reform Act. So it screened his claims, screened his complaint, and found, a failure to state a claim, no basis for him to recover under either of the claims that he had alleged. This opinion strikes me, the opinion that we were able to secure from the Seventh Circuit strikes me, and it stuck with me because not only did we prevail on the First and Eighth Amendment issues in terms of Mr. Perez's stating a claim against the various prison officials, but it also raised an interesting question about recruitment of counsel. Mr. Perez had sought appointment of counsel in the district court, and that request was denied, even though the issues raised by his complaint, his pro se complaint, were very complex. And the Seventh Circuit had previously said, when you're dealing with complex cases, particularly prison litigation or prisoners' rights litigation that have some aspect of deliberate indifference or failure to provide sufficient medical care, those are cases that are ripe for appointment or recruitment of counsel. And in the Perez case on appeal, the Seventh Circuit issued an opinion that was very, very robust on the need to recruit and appoint counsel in these types of cases. And I felt really good about that one because, we talked about Judge Posner and pro se's earlier, but I felt like the court recognized in that case, here's a complaint that was dismissed at the screening stage that has merit. And all of this could have been avoided if you had just recruited counsel. And again, there are so many lawyers and various law firms who are eager to take these cases on, to take ownership of them. And, so folks are lined up at the door to take this case. And the Seventh Circuit reached the right result, but also gave some very pointed advice to the district court to recruit counsel in these types of cases going forward.
That's such a great matter, and it's such a great bookend from robust appointment of counsel on one end to the right to represent yourself on the other end. Right. It's an interesting cottage industry you've developed. So that's really fantastic. Andrew, if you had a magic wand, what one thing would you change about access to justice?
If I had a magic wand, I would wave it and assure that every civil litigant has an attorney. So, I know there's a civil Gideon movement, and, I know that is often a contentious debate. And I don't think that this should be judge-made by any stretch of the imagination, but there are certain areas of the law where people's livelihood is really at stake, and it might not be, a term of imprisonment, but, their life savings or their access to their children or mental health is at stake. And at least in those cases, I think, as a baby step, and I know some states are doing it on their own or have been doing it on their own for a while, but at least in those circumstances, I think there should be something equivalent to a civil Gideon right. But if I could wave the magic wand, I think all litigants would have an attorney because, again, there are so many instances in which either an attorney can at the front end help folks realize that their claims don't have merit, or they can find the merit in those complaints or in those disputes and present them in a digestible form such that the court will rule on the merits rather than dismissing because of technicalities.
That is a great use of the magic wand. Let's end with this. Other than Leslie Rosenthal, who we've heard a lot about, who is your pro bono role model? Feel free to pick more than one, and why.
So I don't think I can talk about role models in the law without mentioning, the folks at the forefront of the civil rights movement. I mean, Justice Thurgood Marshall, Jack Greenberg, who recently passed away. He was one of my professors at Columbia Law School. All of the folks associated with the Legal Defense Fund, those are the people who inspired me and continue to inspire me today to make an impact on society. In terms of contemporary role models, I mean, there are people at our firm who are extraordinarily well-known, extraordinarily busy, but still make time for pro bono. So Ted Boutros is, one of those folks. Jim Ho in our office. My mentor, Veronica Lewis, here in the office, finds time to either, do it herself or supervise, which is another role that lawyers can play. Partners at various law firms, you might not have time to take on a case by yourself, but you can supervise the associates who want to do so. And then, frankly, the associates here at Gibson Dunn who have volunteered their time, who have helped make this, program that we created here in the Dallas office of Gibson Dunn in connection with the Seventh Circuit, taking on those appeals. Those associates who have volunteered their times, I mean, they're doing research and running down issues, and they're not, they haven't graduated yet to get up and take one of these cases on their own and go argue it in the Court of Appeals. But I think they're inspirational and they're sort of role models to me because, they're trying to pitch in, and so I really appreciate that too.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that with us, and thank you so much for talking with me today and for all of the amazing work that you're doing. It's been a pleasure having you on our show.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much to Andrew for making the time to be with us and for all the inspiring work he does. You can learn more about the Pro Bono Institute on the web. Find us at probonoinst.org. Hey listeners, we've gotten some great mail from you, and we'd love even more. Send your comments, feedback, and suggestions to probono@probonoinst.org. For all of us here at PBI, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Pro Bono Happy Hour.